Joining us now is Professor of African Politics and International Relations, and he's the Director, African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of Pretoria. Professor Chris Isike joins us from Pretoria in South Africa. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us on the News at 10.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
Well, if we recall, Mr. Trump said to his supporters this morning, in his own words, America has given us an unprecedented and powerful mandate. I know he has also promised to fix the country in that speech he gave, but what can the rest of the world expect from him?
For one, we know that he is going to be a very inward-looking, if you like, America-centric president. He's focused on making America great again. And that will probably imply some kind of withdrawal from global engagement, but it doesn't mean that it will be a complete withdrawal. It will also mean selective global engagement with particular countries. We know he has talked about, ending the war in Ukraine very quickly, crushing the Hamas and Hezbollah. So there will be some decisiveness around that front, and then hopefully he would look to continue his engagement with trying to normalize relations with the Gulf states in the Middle East. If you like, if it comes to Africa, it will be some kind of benign neglect for the continent, and overall a transactional approach, not just towards Africa, but towards different countries. Trump is going to be engaging with as chief superintendent of the U.S. foreign policy.
But Professor, when you look at U.S.-Africa relations, what does a Trump win mean for this relationship?
Well, it means a lot, and this could have very nuanced, wide-ranging implications for Africa across different fronts. Could be economic, security, political, as well as even talking about climate change, for example. During his first term, between 2017 and 2021, there was a shift in U.S.-Africa relations that was characterized by this transactional approach that I mentioned earlier. But there was a reduced emphasis also on democracy and human rights promotion, and a strategic pivot towards countering China and Russia in Africa. So for example, on the economic front, we would expect that the AGOA and other related trade agreements would have to be renegotiated, and AGOA on the political side will also be used as leverage, some kind of political tool to force countries in the continent to America's national interests. So those are some of the things that we can expect from President Trump, especially towards Africa.
When we look at the election, the democratic process was monitored by countries all over the world. Now, is the American political process still a standard for democracy today when you look at the whole process from start to finish?
Well, there have been many questions about what the world can learn from America in terms of democracy, given how democracy was said to be on the decline in terms of following the last election, where Trump refused to concede the elections, refused to accept that he had lost the elections, and even actually failed an insurrection, January 6th. But that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is to say, well, democracy may have been on the decline because of the particular behavior of Donald Trump, who sowed doubts in the electoral process itself. But the institutions of the United States have held, essentially, not just in ensuring that the process of seeing the results through and certifying the results and following up with the process went through, but also in terms of how he has been prosecuted for some of the crimes that he has committed, and even those that were involved in that insurrection, how they have been prosecuted to date. We know that he's talked about pardoning everyone who was involved one way or another. But the fact that, you still have a country, and, you saw Kamala Harris concede the elections to him and talked about peaceful transfer of power between the Biden administration and to him, showing that there may be lapses here and there in terms of democratic decline, but the institutions are holding, and it gives a bit of hope what would happen going forward in terms of how he governs, and whether the processes would be something worth copying from would remain a different matter. However, there are reasons to ask questions whether countries like Africa can expect to learn anything about democracy from the United States.
All right, Professor, let's talk about the going forward. I mean, from now, we know that this election was one of the toughest, tightest in the history of America when you talk about competition. But going forward now, how do you think that Kamala Harris can recover from what happened on Tuesday night?
Well, I'm not sure it's correct to say that it's one of the tightest elections. It was highly polarized from the polling that we saw. It was supposed to be very tight. However, what we have seen is a red wave where Trump eventually performed better than he did in 2016 and even in 2020. So he's got a strong mandate, and he may well win the House of Representatives. So meaning that he's got the executive, he's got both houses of Congress, and you can also say he's even got the Supreme Court, the judiciary behind him. So he's got that mandate to govern. It's up to him what he chooses to do. He's older now, probably wiser. There's a sense in which one can say that many of the things he said during the electioneering campaign were just to get him to win. And now that he has won, he will tone down the rhetoric, especially when he doesn't have strong opposition from the Democrats. Hopefully, he can unify the country as he has promised, and we would see what happens with America.
All right, thank you very much. Professor of African Politics and International Relations and Director, African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of Pretoria, Professor Chris Isike. Thanks a lot for your time and your contribution on the News at 10.
Thank you for having me.